You guys don't need to worry about me getting revenge from Diddy. I've got 3 moves that make sure he'll never be able to come after me or my family. First, I personally reached out to the victims' legal teams. The real reason he's not getting out is those buried cases behind the scenes. I provided legal funding for 7 victims who had been silent for years and brought in the top criminal attorneys in the country. Second, I bought up every potential post-release business deal he had lined up. I planned this 2 years in advance, so by the time he got sentenced and still had hope of getting out, every partner had already cut ties with him. Third, I don't just have evidence, I've got backups. This is an entire minefield that's been buried for 20 years. I uncovered every secret from the last 30 years. With testimonies from the victims, we interviewed over a dozen people he tricked, threatened, or violated. You think that's harsh? No, he destroyed other people's lives for decades. I'm just making sure he spends a few extra years in prison for it. I'm not afraid of his people, not afraid of his threats. I know he's still in there fantasizing about a comeback, but the truth is, he's never coming back.
People think 50 Cent made a Netflix documentary to tell a story. That's the first mistake. Because Sean Combs' The Reckoning wasn't designed to entertain you. It was designed to corner someone. From the very first frame, 50 Cent wasn't exposing rumors. He was laying out time, place, and sequence. Every party wasn't just a party. Every clip wasn't just a clip. Every call wasn't gossip. It was a timestamp. And Diddy didn't see it coming. While the world watched it like a movie, lawyers watched it like a file. Victims watched it like permission, and judges watched it like pattern evidence. Hidden night parties weren't shown for shock. They were shown to answer one question: who was there? And who always showed up again? Those leaked call recordings weren't drama. They were context. They showed tone, control, timing. The CCTV footage wasn't included to go viral. It was there to show movement. Who entered, who left, and who never spoke publicly afterward. 50 Cent never raised his voice. He never said, "Believe me." He didn't need to. He let the footage speak. And slowly, quietly, the pressure started building around Diddy. Media picked it up first. Then came the public anger. Then something more dangerous happened. Victims who had stayed silent for years started filing requests again. Not new stories, old stories, now backed by visuals. And right here, pause for a second, because if you're still watching, you already understand this isn't just another celebrity downfall. So before this goes any further, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happens next wasn't planned for Netflix, and it definitely wasn't planned by Diddy. The documentary didn't accuse, it connected dots. And once those dots were connected, the legal system couldn't pretend it didn't see them. Behind closed doors, files were reopened, conversations restarted, and one name kept appearing again and again: 50 Cent. Not as a witness, not as a loudmouth, but as the person who changed the shape of the case. Diddy thought the storm had passed. He thought the sentence he already had was the end of it. But the truth is, this was only the beginning. Because when a documentary turns into a roadmap and pressure turns into procedure, the next move doesn't come from social media. It comes from a judge. And when that call was finally made, there were no cameras allowed, no media, no warning, just a courtroom and a case that refused to stay buried. The moment 50 Cent's documentary went live, something strange happened. The noise didn't explode right away. It spread. Clips didn't trend like normal viral moments. They resurfaced in places that matter more. Newsrooms, legal desks, private inboxes. Because this time, the story wasn't coming from a witness interview or a leaked quote. It was coming from footage that already existed. And Diddy felt it before he saw it. Journalists stopped asking opinion-based questions. They started asking timeline questions. Who was there first? Who left last? Who appears in every frame, even when the camera changes? That's when the pressure shifted. Victims who had once been ignored didn't come back angry. They came back prepared. They referenced scenes. They referenced timestamps. They referenced patterns the documentary quietly highlighted. And suddenly, Diddy's past wasn't being discussed as rumors anymore. It was being discussed as repeat behavior. 50 Cent still said nothing. No interviews, no victory lap, no tweets. And that silence made it worse. Because when the loudest person in the room goes quiet, everyone starts asking why. Behind the scenes, legal teams were forced into review mode. Old case files were pulled out. Statements that once felt disconnected were read again, this time with visuals next to them. The documentary had done something dangerous. It gave context to claims that were once dismissed. For Diddy, this wasn't public backlash anymore. This was institutional discomfort. Every headline added weight, every replayed clip tightened the pressure, and every time 50 Cent's name was mentioned, it wasn't framed as entertainment, it was framed as impact. Diddy's defense suddenly looked outdated, built for an era when stories stayed separate. But now everything was connected. Voices, footage, places, dates. And once that connection forms, you can't unsee it. People think cases reopen because of new evidence. That's only half the truth. Sometimes cases reopen because the old evidence finally makes sense. And that's exactly what was happening. While Diddy tried to move forward like nothing changed, the ground underneath him was shifting. Quietly, legally, irreversibly. Because when pressure reaches a certain point, it doesn't explode. It forces a decision. And somewhere above the noise, inside rooms the public never sees, that decision was already being considered. By the time the pressure reached its peak, Diddy believed he already knew the ending. He had served time before. He had survived headlines before, and in his mind, the system had already made its decision. 50 months. That number became a shield, a psychological finish line. Because once a sentence is handed down, people assume the story's over. That's what Diddy was counting on. But 50 Cent was never playing for the first verdict. He was playing for the second look. The documentary didn't challenge the sentence directly. It challenged the assumptions behind it. What if those incidents weren't isolated? What if those witnesses weren't unrelated? What if the reason everything sounded unclear before was because no one had ever lined it up side by side? That's where the danger crept in. Legal analysts started revisiting the case quietly. Not on TV, not in debates, in private. They noticed something uncomfortable. Details that once felt minor suddenly matched up. Locations overlapped. Dates repeated. The same inner circle kept appearing around Diddy again and again. And every time one of those threads surfaced, there it was. A clip, a call, a still frame from 50 Cent's documentary. The sentence that once felt final now felt premature. For the first time, Diddy's past wasn't being reviewed emotionally, it was being reviewed structurally. That's when defense strategies started to crack. Because you can fight accusations, you can dismiss rumors, but you can't argue with patterns once they're clearly mapped. Behind closed doors, legal language changed. Words like resolved disappeared. They were replaced with phrases like further review, procedural concern, and reconsideration. That's when it hit. This wasn't about punishment anymore. This was about whether the system had missed something the first time. And if that was true, then the original sentence wasn't protection. It was a placeholder. While Diddy continued living like the chapter had closed, the case itself was quietly being pulled back off the shelf. Not because of outrage, not because of pressure, but because 50 Cent had done something few people ever managed to do. He didn't add noise, he added clarity. And clarity is the one thing the law can't ignore. Because once a case refuses to stay buried, the next move doesn't come from the media. It comes from a courtroom decision that no one sees coming until it's already too late. It happened on a Friday, the kind of day courts usually try to keep quiet. December 29th, 2026. No buildup, no headlines in advance. Just a call that moved faster than the media ever could. An emergency hearing. The order came straight from Judge Aaron Supamanan. No cameras allowed, no press inside the courtroom, no spectacle. That detail alone said everything. Because when a judge removes the audience, it's not about optics anymore. It's about weight. By the time Diddy was notified, the tone had already shifted. This wasn't a review. This wasn't a formality. This was a response. Lawyers scrambled, files were reprinted, arguments that hadn't been touched in years were suddenly relevant again. And hovering over every preparation, one name kept resurfacing: 50 Cent. Not as a defendant, not as a witness, but as the reason this room was being reopened at all. When Diddy arrived at the courthouse, there were no flashes, no shouting reporters, just silence. The kind of silence that tells you something has already been decided to be reconsidered. Inside the courtroom, Judge Arun Subramanian took the bench without delay. No small talk, no extended remarks. Just a stack of documents that now looked very different than they had before December 2nd. Because once Sean Combs' The Reckoning entered the conversation, those documents were no longer isolated incidents. They were chapters. Every argument Diddy's legal team prepared had one problem. It assumed the case still lived in the past. But the judge wasn't looking backward. He was looking at what had changed. And what had changed was impossible to ignore. Patterns had been surfaced. Connections had been clarified. And actions once considered unrelated were now being evaluated as part of a larger structure. 50 Cent wasn't mentioned casually. His work was referenced carefully, not as entertainment, as material that had triggered review. That's when the room understood this wasn't a routine hearing. This was a recalculation. Diddy's posture shifted. Not panic, something colder. Realization. Because when a judge calls an emergency session without cameras, it means the court isn't interested in reaction. It's interested in correction. And as Judge Arun Subramanian began outlining the scope of the review, it became clear this wasn't about revisiting the past quietly. It was about deciding whether the past had been judged too lightly. Outside, the world knew nothing yet. Inside, everyone felt it. The story that was supposed to be finished had just been pulled back into the present, and whatever happened next wouldn't be shaped by headlines. It would be shaped by what the court now believed it could no longer overlook. The courtroom didn't feel tense, it felt controlled. That's what made it dangerous. Diddy sat quietly while his legal team adjusted papers they already knew by heart. Across from them, the atmosphere wasn't hostile, it was analytical, and Judge Arun Subramanian noticed everything. This wasn't a place for speeches, it was a place for alignment. The first thing the court made clear was simple. This hearing wasn't about emotion, outrage, or public pressure. It was about consistency. Because once 50 Cent's documentary entered the conversation, the court wasn't looking at accusations anymore. It was looking at patterns. Files were referenced slowly, not rushed, not dramatic. Dates were read out loud. Locations were matched. Names appeared more than once, sometimes more than anyone was comfortable admitting. And every time the narrative threatened to break apart, there it was again. A clip, a call, a timestamp. Not as proof on its own, but as confirmation that these events didn't exist in isolation. Diddy's defense leaned on familiarity. They argued history. They argued procedure. They argued closure. But Judge Arun Subramanian wasn't asking whether the case had been closed. He was asking whether it had ever been fully understood. That distinction changed everything. Because when a court starts questioning understanding, it's no longer bound by precedent alone. It's bound by responsibility. 50 Cent's name surfaced again. Not loudly, not accusatorily, just as context. As the person who didn't introduce new allegations, but reorganized the old ones into something impossible to ignore. And that's when the shift happened. Diddy's body language changed. Not fear, awareness, the realization that this wasn't about defending past actions anymore. It was about whether the court believed the original sentence reflected the full scope of behavior. Every argument now had to answer a harder question. If all of this had been seen together before, would the outcome have been the same? No one answered out loud. They didn't need to. The room already knew the direction this was heading. Because once the court starts weighing whether it missed something, it stops thinking in months. It starts thinking in finality. And as Judge Arun Subramanian reviewed the last set of documents, the silence deepened. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone understood the next decision wouldn't be procedural. It would be definitive. And when that kind of decision is being prepared, there's no defense strategy left, only consequences. By now, Diddy understood this wasn't about one documentary. It was about why this moment felt different from every storm he'd survived before. In the past, accusations came one at a time. They were scattered, unconnected, easy to isolate. This time, everything arrived together. That was the difference 50 Cent created. The court wasn't being asked to believe a person. It was being asked to recognize a structure. Visuals didn't stand alone. Audio didn't float without context. Every piece pointed to another piece, and that connection changed how responsibility was measured. Diddy's defense tried to slow the pace. They emphasized procedure. They reminded the court of prior rulings. They leaned on the idea that nothing new had technically occurred. But the court wasn't searching for something new. It was searching for something missed. Because when evidence is fragmented, it looks harmless. When it's aligned, it looks intentional. And alignment is what 50 Cent forced into the open. The documentary didn't accuse Diddy of one moment. It showed repetition, not chaos and routine. The same environments, the same access points, the same aftermath. Victim statements that once sounded unrelated now echoed each other in language, timing, and reaction. That's when the legal temperature changed. Because the law doesn't only punish actions, it punishes patterns once they're visible. Diddy wasn't being weighed against a headline anymore. He was being weighed against a system of behavior. And the system didn't look accidental. The more the court examined the sequence, the harder it became to treat earlier decisions as final. What once felt like mercy now felt like an incomplete calculation. That's why this hearing mattered. Not because of outrage, not because of public demand, but because the court realized something crucial. The first sentence was based on fragments. This review was based on the whole picture. And when the whole picture finally comes into focus, the question stops being, what happened? It becomes, what does this deserve? Diddy could feel the shift without anyone saying it out loud. The room wasn't moving toward compromise. It was moving toward closure. And closure in this context didn't mean resolution. It meant permanence. Because once the court accepts that it previously underestimated the scope, there's only one direction left to go. Upward, toward a decision that wouldn't need revisiting again. Toward an outcome that would end the conversation completely. And as the review reached its final stage, everyone understood the same thing. This wasn't about reopening a case, it was about correcting it. The room went completely still. Not tense, not loud, still. Judge Arun Subramanian didn't rush his words. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform for anyone. Because this moment wasn't about drama, it was about finality. Diddy stood there listening, realizing that everything he had relied on before, status, history, influence, had already been stripped away by the process itself. Across the courtroom, the legal teams knew it too. This wasn't a debate anymore. There were no gaps left to argue. Judge Arun Subramanian began by addressing the original sentence, the 50 months that once felt decisive. He explained calmly why that number no longer held. Not because of public outrage, not because of pressure, but because the scope of conduct had been reevaluated. The court had not simply reviewed incidents. It had reviewed continuity. That's when 50 Cent's work finally landed, where it was always headed. Not in headlines, not in opinions, but in the reasoning. The documentary hadn't accused Diddy directly. It had done something far more damaging. It had shown how every piece fit together. Judge Arun Subramanian made it clear. When behavior is repeated, organized, and sustained, the law no longer sees individual acts. It sees intent. The courtroom didn't react. No gas, no whispers, just the sound of a decision being completed. Then came the sentence. The original term was officially vacated, and in its place, the words that ended everything Diddy thought was behind him. Life sentence. No emphasis. No pause for effect. Just clarity. Diddy didn't collapse. He didn't protest. He stood there absorbing the weight of something that couldn't be appealed away from memory. Because this wasn't just a longer punishment. It was the court acknowledging that the first judgment had underestimated the reality. And somewhere far from that courtroom, 50 Cent never spoke. He didn't need to. His final shot had already landed. Not through accusation, but through alignment. The system didn't change because someone yelled louder. It changed because the truth had finally been seen all at once. And once that happened, there was nothing left to negotiate. Only a sentence that would not be revisited. A conclusion that would not be softened. A reckoning that had finally reached its end. When the courtroom emptied, nothing followed. No press conference, no statements, no victory speeches. Diddy was escorted out the same way he came in, quietly. Except now, the future he'd been walking toward no longer existed. Outside, the world was still catching up. By the time the news broke, it didn't land like a shock. It landed like confirmation, because everything had already been seen. Every clip people once argued about, every call people once dismissed, every party people once laughed off, all of it now lived under one conclusion. This wasn't a fall from grace, it was an ending. And what made it final wasn't the sentence alone. It was the silence afterward. 50 Cent didn't post. He didn't explain. He didn't revisit the documentary, because there was nothing left to expose. The film had already done what it was meant to do. Not destroy a man publicly, but force the truth into a shape the system could no longer ignore. Diddy's image froze in time at that moment, not as a mogul, not as a hitmaker, but as a warning, a reminder that power doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes when patterns become visible, and that's the part people miss. This didn't happen because one documentary went viral. It happened because everything finally lined up. The calls, the footage, the testimonies, the timelines. One by one, they stopped being stories and started becoming structure. And once structure forms, the law doesn't debate it. It responds. The reckoning wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was procedural, permanent. Years from now, people will still argue about influence, motives, and intent, but they won't argue about the outcome, because outcomes don't care about opinions. They care about alignment. And when alignment finally came, it didn't just change a sentence. It closed a chapter that had been kept open for far too long. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't spectacle. It was resolution. The kind that doesn't trend, but never goes away. And that's why this story doesn't end with noise. It ends with a door closing, a system correcting itself, and one final truth settling in. The reckoning didn't come from the courtroom. It started the moment the truth was shown exactly as it was.